So you may have heard some of the comments made by Jean-François Roberts, the French language minister, earlier in the week, talking about the fact that he was, I think the word to use might be disappointed, concerned with the level of French being taught at English schools, specifically pointing, I think, a finger at the English Montreal School Board. So we spoke to Joe ORTONA. Now, we did a rather lengthy interview today, and Brian is going to post a link to that on the CJD800.com website if you want to hear it all, and it runs about half an hour. But I wanted some of the highlights from it. All right, with Joe ORTONA, the chair of the EMSB. And I began by asking if this accusation by the French language minister that French, is not being taught properly to kids in English schools, whether he considers that to be fair or not. Here's what he said.
There's this perception in Quebec, in the general population, because they don't know anything about our system. They know what they did in school. And what they did in school, they go to French school, they get about an hour of English per week. So they think that that's what our kids are getting in our schools, about an hour of French per week. It isn't like that at all. And I'm trying to break that perception. The stats don't lie. And so the numbers are there. And what he's doing is he's capitalizing on things that people are saying about some kids who are struggling in CEGEP with French. And he's trying to paint a global picture that that's the entire English-speaking community. The truth is, we're a public system. We don't refuse any kids. So we have kids that are on the spectrum. We have kids that have, social adaptability issues, kids that have learning disabilities, and they have difficulty mastering a second language. We have kids that have those issues in the French system, and they have difficulty mastering French, and that's their only language. So when they impose these restrictions on, like with Bill 96, that now these kids have to take all these extra French classes, we're going to see these kids struggling. The minister's trying to paint the picture that that's all of the EMSB or all of the English schools across Quebec. It's not the case. But we have to find a way for these kids to be able to graduate and be able to become contributing, successful members of society, not, finding ways to make it more difficult for them to be successful. They're already struggling. We should be easing them into the transition into adulthood and from school to the workforce, not making it harder for them to be successful.
I think back to not that long ago when this subject first came up, this teaching French in English school boards, and it seems to me, and I remember we spoke about this on air, the EMSB sort of prided itself on the fact that it was teaching not just French, but teaching really good enough French that when a kid graduated, they wouldn't have an issue in CEGEP. But then, of course, this all changes now because the restrictions, the qualifications, I guess, in CEGEP are different. Is there a point to it to say that, yes, you learn good French in an EMSB school, but it's not good enough now based on what the government is asking or telling you have to do to get into a CEGEP?
No, I don't believe that. I think that that's playing into what the government is or what Roberts is trying to do. I think we teach French very well. Our students learn it. They're proficient. They're fully bilingual in both official languages. But there are some students who struggle in mastering the languages, and they struggle at mastering a second language, and they have difficulty. That's why we get some students who normally wouldn't have English eligibility, but they come to our schools because they're granted English eligibility under humanitarian grounds because they have certain learning disabilities and they have difficulty with the language. We have to find ways to help those kids, but for the general population within our schools, they're learning French and they're learning it well. And I don't think taking a couple of more French classes is going to have an effect on them. I pride myself on it.
So that's Joe ORTONA addressing that. And then I asked about, and this is something that perhaps doesn't get talked about as much, that this whole idea, the issue of finding enough French teachers. It's one thing to say you should be teaching better French, but what about the idea of actually finding enough French teachers to fulfill their requirements? Here's what he said.
I can tell you our Human Resources Department works practically around the clock throughout the summer to make sure that we have all the teachers that we need, because we are struggling to find teachers. There is a shortage of teachers out there, unfortunately, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, and one of them is the workload and how little support they're getting and resources from the government. I think that's a whole separate issue. But yeah, on the first day of school, I could say we almost have all of our teachers found. But the important thing is we actually have teachers in our classroom, unlike the French sector where the minister said, we can just find a parent volunteer or somebody to sit there and watch the kids and just supervise them, which I think is totally unacceptable.
You're dealing now with the French language minister, who used to be, ironically enough, the education minister. So there has been some contact, I would guess, but then I remember reading a while ago, in the midst of all this, and I think this may be unique to this government, there's very little negotiation, discussion between the government and the actual board. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's very accurate. And it's hard to have a dialogue when you're dealing with a government that doesn't even recognize your legitimacy to exist.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried to abolish school boards. And even after we won in court repeatedly on the Bill 40 issue, we never really got a sense of respect or any kind of legitimacy whatsoever that, we're the spokespersons for the English-speaking community or for English education. It's sort of like this top-down, we tell you what to do and you don't have a say, which of course doesn't respect Section 23 at all, our right to manage and control our school system, but they don't care. And the only thing that we've gotten them to bend a little bit on is, the constant threat of going to court. And that's how we got Minister Drainville to back down on Bill 23, which was another school reform, which shows that Bill 40 was a failure because they needed another reform 18 months later where they were going to name the DG and be able to overrule school board decisions, which are clear violations of our right to manage and control. And only because we said repeatedly, if you do this, we're going to court the next day, that they finally backed off. And that's about the only thing that they understand or that's worked so far.
Which is interesting because then, of course, you can't help but think for you pushing back, and I say you, I mean the school board pushing back on 40, then on Bill 96, they kind of look at you and go, you're a bit of a fly in the ointment here, and we're going to do this just to kind of poke at you. You feel that sometimes?
I mean, look, François Legault called the EMSB a radical group.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's so radical about standing up for our rights, wanting our rights to be preserved and protected, and when you're going to violate them, that we're going to fight back. I mean, other than the Court of Appeal decision on Bill 21 that came recently, we've won in court every round. So I don't know who the radical is. Is it the school board that's fighting for our rights, or is it the government that is repeatedly violating people's rights and with complete disregard? That's the reality. The reality is they're trying to paint the picture that the English-speaking community is a unilingual hub from the West Island that has refused to adapt to Quebec culture. We were the ones that created the French immersion programs in the 1960s because we wanted our kids to be fully proficient in French, a full 15 years before Bill 101. So we've always been ahead of the curve when it comes to language. And there's two really big misconceptions about the public system, and in particular the English public system, that we're all working hard to really try to break at the EMSB, and the first one is about the quality of French, and we see it in the exam results. So the truth is, if you're sending your kids to our schools, you're not losing out on the French. And it's hard to break that perception because it appears illogical. If you think about it, you say, I want my kid to be fully proficient in French. French is important for me. I don't want my kids to move out west or to the United States. I want them to stay here. Well, I'm going to put them in French school because that's where they're going to get the best French possible, the best French education possible. But the results are showing the opposite. And it's the same thing with private and public school. The ministry results that just came out now are showing we're getting the as high a success rate as the private sector. So our kids are doing really well in spite of the fact that they're not investing enough in education and they're underfunding us. In spite of the fact that we're having these challenges, staffing, finding teachers and resource personnel. In spite of those challenges, we're doing as well as the private sector. In language, we're doing as well as the French sector. And these are perceptions that are hard to break because people think that the French system is better to learn French, and people think that if you're paying, well, the private system is better than the public system. But the facts are showing that it's the opposite.
By the way, I will tell you, Joe Ortona, straight shooter, he says it the way it is. And by the way, if you want to see that full interview, as I said, it goes on for quite a while. At the end, I actually bring up this idea of him perhaps pursuing a political future. He was going to run in the last municipal election, and then when he came out in favor, of course, or against rather, Bill 96, Denis Coderre, who was then running for mayor, dropped him. So you can go get that whole interview by going to our CJD800.com webpage and click on the link there for the entire podcast.